You look them in the eye and say the words, "I forgive you," and you mean it. The anger has been cleared out. But then comes the second part, the part where you acknowledge that while the resentment is gone, the memory of what happened is staying exactly where you can see it. Almost immediately, you face a different kind of pressure. People notice you aren't returning to the way things were. They ask why you've changed or why you're being so distant. To them, if you haven't forgotten, you haven't truly forgiven. We live with a cultural expectation that forgiveness requires a total reset. When you refuse to erase the past and instead maintain a new boundary, the narrative often shifts. Suddenly, you're the one being difficult. This raises a question. Is this distance an act of lingering bitterness, or is something else happening beneath the surface? A reaction driven by the mind's internal requirement for safety. Think back to the baseline before the betrayal. You were open. There was a sense of blind trust, built on the assumption that the foundation of the relationship was solid and predictable. Then, the promise is broken or the lie is revealed. In that moment, the foundation shatters. This isn't just a change in plans. It is a sudden, structural collapse of your social environment. This collapse is felt internally as a shock to the system. Moving on isn't a matter of simply tidying up. You are now standing in the middle of a completely different landscape than the one you inhabited yesterday. To understand why the mind resists letting the memory go, we have to look at the neurobiological shifts occurring during a betrayal. This brain schematic shows how we process a broken promise. On the left is the response to a physical burn. On the right is the response to betrayal. The brain uses these same neural pathways to register both types of pain. Because it registers betrayal as literal injury, it triggers a defensive response, building neural barriers to insulate the organism from a repeat occurrence. The brain's primary function is survival, wired to prioritize memories that cause pain, ensuring that information is never deleted because it represents a known threat. In this context, the inability to forget isn't a failure of character. It is the brain performing its biological duty to avoid a second burn. The mind doesn't just store the memory, it analyzes it. It breaks down the event to figure out how the betrayal happened in the first place. This diagram shows the process of pattern recognition. The brain isolates specific cues, like a shift in honesty or a pattern of neglect, and logs these behaviors as indicators of future risk. Using this information, the mind adjusts its internal map, calculating a new, wider perimeter of safety, fundamentally changing access to the source. The resulting emotional distance isn't a weapon used against the other person. It's the practical result of that updated map, moving through the world with better information. What looks like a grudge to an observer is actually the mind applying the lessons of the past to stay safe in the present. When you finally face the person who betrayed you, you are now doing so with this updated perspective. You are no longer operating on the blind trust you had before the collapse. They may expect you to be angry, but instead they find you calm. The anger has been processed and set aside. What remains is simply the information. You can honestly say you've moved forward, but moving forward doesn't mean you have to act as if you didn't learn anything. Maintaining a boundary isn't about living in the past. It's about acknowledging that the landscape has changed, and you are navigating it accordingly. Forgiveness is a personal choice to let go of the emotional weight of a betrayal. It's about clearing out the resentment so you can find your own peace. But peace doesn't require you to be blind. It doesn't require you to dismantle the protections your brain built to keep you from being hurt again. Having boundaries is the natural result of learning from your experiences. It allows you to forgive the person while still respecting the lesson.